చాలా షోరూమ్స్ ఉన్నాయి కదా, ఆయా స్టేట్ స్పెషల్ జ్యువెలరీ ఇక్కడ తీసుకొచ్చాం. రాజస్థాన్ నుంచి పొల్కి, పంజాబ్ నుంచి కుందన్, కలర్ఫుల్ మీనాకారి, ఎనామిల్ వర్క్స్ లాంటివన్నీ తీసుకొచ్చి ఫ్లోర్ అంతా నింపేది. అయితే ఇంకేమమ్మా, లక్ష్మీ పెళ్లి నగరాన్ని ముహూర్తంలో తీసుకున్నాం.
కళ్యాణ్ జ్యువెలర్స్ ముహూర్త్ వెడ్డింగ్ ఫ్లోర్ ఇప్పుడు పని చేస్తున్నది.
హోమియోపతిలోని ఒక అగ్రస్థానం సంపాదించుకున్న డాక్టర్ కేర్ హోమియోపతి. అనుభవం, అంకిత భావం కలిగిన డాక్టర్లచే మెరుగైన హోమియో వైద్యం అందిస్తుంది డాక్టర్ కేర్ హోమియోపతి.
Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, liebe Zuschauerinnen.
Welcome, dear viewers, dear listeners. We greet you to the 18th program of the series, The Great Cosmic Teachings of Jesus of Nazareth to His Disciples and Apostles who could understand them. What is meant by this topic? What did Jesus of Nazareth talk about 2,000 years ago in the small circle of his followers? This is what we'd like to bring home to you, dear viewers, dear listeners. The spiritual divine teachings into which he guided his apostles and disciples back then were revealed in our time by the free Spirit, Christ through his prophetess and emissary, Gabriella. The great cosmic teachings help us to recognize that in our spiritual origin, we human beings are divine beings, and how each one of us who wants to can again grow closer to this true being. Today, Christ shows us the way to freedom once more, out of religious coercion, out of dogmas, out of stone churches and church hierarchies, toward God, the eternal intelligence which dwells in each person. In a public series of schoolings, Gabriella, the emissary of the Free Spirit, explained the teachings of the Christ of God from her rich treasure of experience. Many people who had the opportunity to hear Gabriella's explanations wanted to read these valuable aids and explanations. This is why they were compiled into a 5-volume work, from which we read excerpts in this program series. Dear viewers, dear listeners, the great cosmic teachings are also a high goal for us who are privileged to present them to you. There is still a lot to learn, but the cosmic teachings and Gabriella's explanations inspire us, and we present them from this inner conviction. So we're not television professionals, and after the program, each of us will return to his or her occupation. We now continue with reading in Volume 2 of the explanations.
Christ speaks in his great cosmic teachings. In every question is the being, the answer for you. In every answer is the being, and perhaps, in turn, the question for you. In every conversation, The being is active. You experience it in you. The being is in every word. It speaks to you. In everything that you see and encounter is the being. It shows itself to you and speaks to you. Gabriela explained the following about this. Let us realize that in every question is, at the same time, the lawful answer. The question is energy, and in each human energy is the divine energy, the helper that is always present. When we open up the intelligence, our spiritual divine heritage, by putting order in our life, by recognizing the will of God and fulfilling it more and more, then we grow into selflessness, into the love for God, and into His wisdom. Wisdom is the intelligence of God, His deed.
Christus spricht weiter.
Christ continues, when you are in your innermost being, then your temple is pure, and you are in communication with the pure. You hear what others do not hear. You behold what others do not see. You know what others do not know. You recognize what others do not recognize. You sense what others do not sense. You smell and taste what others do not smell and taste. You perceive what others do not perceive, because you are the truth, the stillness of the temple, the selfless love, the law, God. Gabriela explains the substance of these high words from the Spirit of the Christ of God for us. Dear fellow people, if our divine consciousness has opened to the extent that it can feel and sense into all things, then our soul is largely filled with light, and the divine is active in us. Our consciousness expands through the actualization of the eternal laws. It radiates into infinity, and also into the realms of the eternal being. No region in heaven is foreign to the divine consciousness. If we have opened it again, then it radiates and illuminates all regions of the all, the cosmos, because the all has again become active in the soul. The person has then returned home. He has found his way to God, the origin. The soul is pure once more and has become the crystal of life. And so, we must again become what we already are in our innermost being, purest substance, noble and fine, the divine law, the selfless love. Bit by bit, each of us must divest himself of these garments, that is, discard his human aspects, transform the garments, to then stand there in the garment of eternal life, of selfless love. And so, we are on earth to become divine again.
Christus spricht in seinem Lehrsatz,
Christ speaks in his axiom, recognize every issue, every matter, every difficulty, every problem, every situation, every conversation, yes, every word speaks itself. The being in the issue, in the matter, in the problem, in the difficulty, in every situation, in every deed, and in every thought, speaks in turn the mighty self, the being. Gabriele explains what this means for us, for our life. Every problem, every difficulty has three aspects. Let us call these three aspects the three tongues. They are the conscious mind, the subconscious, and the spirit consciousness. The conscious mind is what we grasp with our mind at the moment. In the subconscious is what we have an inkling of, what still lies in us as human weaknesses, faults, and things that have not yet been cleared up and forgiven, which could thus be the cause for the difficulty or the problem.
Gabriele fährt in ihren Ausführungen fort.
Gabriela continued with her explanations. The third tongue is the tongue of truth. It is the eternal law in all things. It is the solution that lies in every difficulty, in every problem. If we accept the lawful solution and clear up our wrongdoings with Christ, then it is also resolved in our soul, that is, dissolved. And so, every difficulty and every problem speaks to us. With which tongue? We have to find that out for ourselves. We experience it in our thoughts. When a problem appears, then we ask ourselves, what are we thinking? What does it want to tell us? But if we pick the problem to pieces and blame our neighbor, then we have neither grasped nor solved the problem. We speak with the tongues of the conscious mind or the subconscious, and don't let the tongue of the truth speak, which is the solution in all things, the Spirit of God, through which everything is solved in the soul.
Die Erläuterungen von
Gabriela's explanations also give us many tips about how we can put the high teachings from the Spirit of God into practice. That is, apply them in our daily life. Gabriela explains further. This is why we should briefly examine everything that comes our way, every unpleasantness. What does the issue, the problem, the difficulty want to tell us? When we ask Christ, who is in all things, for help and support, then in time we will sense ever more often and more clearly what the lawful solution is. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. In every situation, in all that comes to us, we may call on God, the Being, in all things, and then Christ, the Being, the eternal law, will support and help us so that we can lawfully solve the problem, the matter, the difficulty.
Jegliche Situation gesetzmäßig zu lösen vermögen. Gabriele gibt noch weitere Hinweise.
Gabriele gives us still more tips. We should make it our task to address ourselves again and again. Man, take yourself back. The solution in everything is Christ. When we become aware of this, then in time we will feel His closeness. Then we will also think about each word and place what we want to say in the law. Again, with a request, Christ, help and support us. Only in this way will we gain access to the inner kingdom, to our divine heritage. So even in this troubled time in which the world has a destructive and demoralizing effect on mankind and on nature, we will find the Spirit of God. We need Him. Without Him, nothing will function in the future, because the for or against, the either or The decision for or against Christ is inevitable. Every day we are faced with a question either or, for or against Christ.
Liebe Mitmenschen,
Dear fellow people, let us now let more words from the Christ of God in his axiom have their effect on us. The shell, the humanness, speaks itself. The power in the shell, the being, also speaks itself. It is the I am. The one who has become the being, the selfless self, is in communication with the peer. He sees with the eyes of truth. He clarifies, makes order, clears up, plans and speaks from the eternal being, the selfless self. Gabrielle explains this. We have already heard quite often that everyone speaks himself. The pure beings speak the eternal law. The impure beings, the human beings, speak their impurities, their personal law, that which is impure and stored in their soul, in their brain, and in the stars of the law of cause and effect. The impure one is connected with his impure aspects. That is, he is in communication with his causes. The pure one is in communication with the eternal law. The impure one is without peace. He constantly seeks approval of his base self. The pure one is peaceful. He does not seek. He is in constant communication with his true self, the divine in him. We are on earth to become pure again, particularly in the present time. This is a desire of many. Many sense that this world no longer provides a hold for them, that they can no longer persist in this world. Many comprehend that only one can help. It is Christ, our Redeemer. He helps. He is coming ever closer to us.
Gabriele erklärt weiter.
Gabriele explains further. Let us put this to the test every day. Let us call on Him, Christ, in each situation and ask Him to help and support us. Christ is always with us. When we leave our house or apartment, Christ goes with us. No matter what we do, we affirm that He is with us, that He helps and supports us. Let us affirm this over and over again. When we feel and sense into our inner being by saying yes to Christ, who is the light of our soul and the law of infinity, then our days will become more light-filled, and we will become freer day by day. We feel courage and strength so as to clear up the human aspects that the day points out to us, because we call on Christ, because we ask Him for support and help in every situation. Through this profound communication with the highest in us, we become more certain and more joyful. Joyfully and thankfully, we will then clear up the human aspects. In this way, we grow into our spiritual heritage more and more, into the life that brings us security, peace, joy, selfless love, and thankfulness.
In his axiom, the Christ of God presents more aspects. Let us allow his words to have their effect on us again. The base ego does not know the I am, but the I am knows the base ego, because the I am, the being, permeates all things. The pure one, who keeps the order of the temple, will endeavor to clarify every situation from the perspective of the law, to lead every conversation in a lawful way, to solve every issue, every matter, every problem, and every difficulty from the perspective of the law, God.
Dear fellow people, also regarding these words from Christ, Gabriele gives us several things to take along on our path. This could be a task for us. Let us become the pure one who keeps the order of the temple, who examines his thoughts more each day. As we have read, thoughts and words create forms. They bring about effects. Also the thought, which we think, perhaps imprudently and carelessly, is a sending potential, an action, as it were. The reaction is even bigger, because the potential of the feelings and sensations in our thoughts is part of them as well. If we consistently turn to Christ in every situation, that is, if we count on Him and use every moment for clearing up and turning back and changing our ways, then already within a few days we will sense how the stream of the positive power embraces us and carries us upward and forward. By consistently turning to Christ, we experience inner tranquility and stillness, and from this experience self-possession. Through this we take a step back from our human ego and see it from a higher position. The effect is that we are able to resolve it more quickly and easily.
Christ speaks. If the human ego wants to resolve the issue, the matter, the difficulty, the problem, the situation, or the conversation with its base ego, then it either remains unresolved or it leads to chaos. Let us hear what Gabriele explains regarding this. When we look into this world, we recognize what the intellect has accomplished. The intellectual person wants to solve everything himself. The result is worldwide chaos. Therefore, let us turn back. If we resolve our personal chaos with Christ, then very gradually we find our way to the I Am, to our divine heritage.
Christ speaks to us in his great cosmic teachings. Know that the being in all things is the speaking God. He speaks to you from the issue, from the matter, from the difficulty, from the problem, from the situation, from the deed, from every conversation. In her explanations about these words of Christ, Gabriele encourages us with the following words. Let us realize that God, our eternal Father in Christ, speaks to us unceasingly. Every movement of our body, every word, every thought could not be if it were not for the power of God. Let us wake up, let us live more consciously, and we will experience the newness of God, the eternally speaking God, for the divine law is eternally flowing, eternally giving, and reveals itself eternally.
We continue reading in the axiom of the Christ of God. He says, Everything is consciousness. The pure is consciousness, and the impure is consciousness. The pure speaks in the Holy of Holies, in you, to you, and at the same time out of you. The impure speaks the impure. It speaks the burden. It speaks out of the disorder. It speaks the disorder, and so there can be, in turn, only disorder in the world. Gabriele explains about this. So we have disorder in the world. In our innermost being, in our heart, there is order. So let us immerse in the holy order which is in us, and we will create order around us, in our families, in partnerships and marriages, at work, everywhere. Let us create order by no longer feuding with each other, by repenting and forgiving and understanding each other. Then there will be peace. The inner path which leads to eternal life, to peace, goes from without to within.
Dear fellow people, the more we find our way into our inner being, into the realm of the eternal being which is in us, we sense the being, the heavens. Heaven, our homeland, cannot be described in words. If we were to imagine that the paths are made of gold, all the buildings are the finest porcelain or purest gemstones, and everything radiates mightier than all suns and stars together, then all that would be merely a reflection of our homeland. That is the splendor of our Father, and that is the splendor of our eternal homeland. So, it's worth it to open up our inner homeland, so that after the death of our body, we can again be there in the eternal light. This is the goal of all of us. This is the path of all of us. Christ helps and supports us. Often the Lord says, "You are children of the fullness," or "You are children of a king." They are words, but we human beings can hardly comprehend what they signify in their depth. Nevertheless, let us all allow this to have its effect on us, for our soul lights up when it is touched by the light of the eternal homeland.
Surely these words have awakened in all of us the longing for our eternal homeland, and whoever wants to can let them continue to affect him, and can take along the tip to call on Christ in every situation, and to ask him for help and support. Dear viewers, dear listeners, in the second volume of the great cosmic teachings of Jesus of Nazareth to his disciples and apostles who could understand them, with explanations by Gabriele, there are many wonderful teachings and tips, some of which we heard today. We warmly invite you to also join us again next time. We will continue learning how we can concretely strive for spiritual evolution, and will thereby receive many interesting tips about ourselves and our lives on earth. For example, about illusion and reality, about the terms that we shape, about the development of illnesses, or why each of us perceives tones, colors, situations differently, and much more. If you like, tune in. Until then, we wish you all the best, much strength, and a warm greetings in God.
was Jesus of Nazareth? What was his childhood and youth like? This question is asked by people all over the world who want to learn the truth about the life of the greatest teacher of mankind. Followers of the Nazarene report authentically about the life of Jesus of Nazareth, free of the interpretations and falsifications of church historians. Their sources are Christ's revelations given through Gabriela, his prophetess and emissary in our time. Who can better describe the life on earth of Jesus of Nazareth than Christ himself? He talks about his parents, Mary and Joseph, about his spiritual struggles, about his love for the animals, and the beginning of his teaching years. Who was Jesus of Nazareth, his childhood and youth? His descriptions reach our hearts, and his life is a symbol for mankind.
Herzlich willkommen beim Lebenskompass.
Welcome to the program Life's Compass. Dear viewers, dear listeners, how can we shape our lives so that we feel free and satisfied? How can we lead a meaningful life? And how can we make a good contribution to the world around us? These are questions that many of us surely ask ourselves. But where can we find an answer? The value system that politics, church and society provides does not seem to offer satisfying solutions to these questions, and this demonstrates the state of this world. Where we look, we see suffering, war and misery. What institutions consider themselves moral authorities have to say? The churches justify our brutal treatment of animals, or with the image of a punishing God and the threat of eternal damnation, they make their believers afraid. We can talk about freedom here. And who are our role models? The dazzling celebrities of TV and of YouTube fame today. Surveys show that despite our prosperity, many people are not happy. For my guests here in studio, the life of Jesus of Nazareth is the greatest example for ethics and morals. They are convinced that his teachings show us the way that ultimately leads us to a happy, fulfilled life, and at the same time leads to a better world, namely the orientation to the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount, which he taught and lived as an example 2,000 years ago. Jesus often conveyed the substance of his teachings in the parables, so that they could be understood by everyone. In our Life's Compass program today, we want to talk about one of the parables from Jesus of Nazareth, namely the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Here in the studio with me are Lisa, Stefan and Estefania. Nice that you are here, and my name is Ron. Estefania, the first question to you. The teachings of Jesus of Nazareth play a central role in your life. Why?
They give me a goal for my life. It is also a very specific guideline to which I can orient myself during my daily life. In the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, I find an inner support which I find nowhere else in the world. They contain the answer to everything that comes toward me. For example, take the golden rule, do to others as you would have them do to you. I think that is an ingenious help for learning to live without expectations of others, and therefore to become more free, and also to leave the other one his freedom.
You mentioned the golden rule. This statement of Jesus of Nazareth and his other statements seem to be found mainly in the Bible. Is the Bible a standard in your life?
No, it is not. The question is, what is actually the divine teaching in the Bible? And what in the Bible over thousands of years was falsely passed on or simply invented by power-hungry priests? But this question is easy for me to answer. Because in the present time, through the prophetess and emissary of God, Gabriele, God our Father and Christ speak to all people and bring the unadulterated truth. Through Gabriele we know, for instance, that the Sermon on the Mount is not a utopia. It can be lived, and in it I find the principles and suggestions that are a standard for my life.
This revealed truth that you just mentioned is also contained in many books written by Gabriele. We have one of these books here today. Stefan, what is this book all about?
Well, it is the book This Is My Word, Alpha and Omega, the Gospel of Jesus. It is based on an extra-biblical gospel, which, as Estefania said, is explained and corrected by Christ via the prophetic word in the present time. In it, Christ himself very clearly presents his life as Jesus of Nazareth and tells how it is meant to be understood.
Through the prophetic word?
Through the prophetic word, of course, yes.
Today we want to talk about a parable, namely the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. How is this parable given in the book that you just told us about?
I think it would be best for me to read it now. In order to understand the background, perhaps it is good to know what happened before. A woman was caught in adultery and the people wanted to stone this woman. Jesus was there and spoke the famous sentence, "Let the one among you who is without sin cast the first stone." After this event, he then said to several who considered themselves righteous and disdained others, "Two men went up into the temple to pray. One, a rich Pharisee, versed in the law, the other a tax collector who was a sinner. The Pharisee stood and prayed in the following way, 'God, I thank you that I am not like other people, usurers, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give tithes of all that I possess.' And the tax collector stood far away and would not raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, 'God, be merciful to me, a sinner.' I say to you, this one went down to his house more justified than the other one. For the one who exalts himself will be abased, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted."
The Pharisee considered himself a better person than those who, in his eyes, were unjust, the usurers, the tax collectors. With such a viewpoint, is there something objectionable, Lisa?
Well, I think what's important here is that the Pharisee put himself above others. The Pharisees were part of the caste of priests at that time, and here in the parable it says that he was versed in the law, and apparently that's why he put himself above others. I know about myself that solely spiritual knowledge, the knowledge about the laws of God, will not bring me further in my life if I don't try every day to put the teachings of God into practice in my life. I think arrogance is a great danger in life. An arrogant person doesn't learn anymore. Arrogance has no leeway, and then development and improvement cannot take place. We can say that arrogance is the opposite of learning.
Arrogance is the opposite of learning. That sounds interesting. I've never heard that before. Could you perhaps say a bit more about that?
Well, learning requires that I see, that is, recognize my weaknesses and want to overcome them. An arrogant person doesn't learn anymore. He is convinced that he is the best, and he puts himself above others. I can also give an example of this. For a long time, I thought that I was a good person, mainly because I was always ready to help others or to give them good advice. But thanks to Gabriele, thanks to the spiritual teachings that she brought to humankind, I've discovered more and more that what is decisive is not actually what I do for others, but the motivation behind it. And if I'm honest with myself and ask myself, why did I help someone? Why do I want to help someone? Then I realize that often I don't do it out of neighborly love, but basically for myself, for my ego.
For your ego, so that you look good or what?
Exactly, so that the others think I'm good, that they like me, and I simply put myself above others as being smarter, more worthwhile. When I do this, it means that I can no longer see my weaknesses, and when this is so, then I no longer learn.
And so, if I understood you correctly, that means that we can say that an arrogant person actually doesn't know himself.
I think that we human beings often have a false image of ourselves. We think that our own behavior, our own thoughts are not so nice. But actually we are very quick to look for our neighbor's faults and even wait for our neighbor to change himself instead of focusing on ourselves and recognizing and changing ourselves so that we become better people. I think that's really arrogant of us.
The parable also tells me that perhaps I should first look at myself. I should try to recognize what are my faults or what can I do better. Through Gabriele, we also know that our neighbor can be our mirror. If I realize this and try to recognize myself in my neighbor, then I really have the chance to change myself.
My neighbor is my mirror. That's also an interesting statement. Can you explain it a bit more precisely?
Yes. If I observe myself and watch, what am I thinking about my neighbor? Or when my neighbor does something that upsets or disturbs me a lot, if I then recognize that this is something that disturbs me, it means that it's a part of me. It is my thoughts. And here I can start by questioning myself. Why do I think this way? Do I perhaps have the same traits? Or do I do things exactly like what my neighbor does that then upsets me? If I then realize what the other is reflecting to me, then I have the chance to change myself. Because I realize that I also have this in me. Then I can work on it and thus change my life.
And how can we imagine this? How does this concretely look in practice? So I now have someone whose behavior totally upsets me. What do I do next?
For example, if someone is impatient with me or doesn't really listen when I'm speaking because he already knows the answer or because he actually already knows everything better than I do and he also lets me sense this, at that moment I can get irritated. Or I can also briefly look at myself and ask, with whom do I act exactly the same? And if I'm honest with myself, then a phase or some situation occurs to me where I realize that I'm just as impatient and disparaging toward the other one. And when I ask further, then I find out very concretely why I act this way with this person or in this moment. And since I was on the receiving side and felt in myself what others have felt, that it's not so nice, not so pleasant, it helps me to act differently the next time and to listen to the other one with an open heart. I think that's what's so fascinating about the original Christian teachings. It's always about getting to know yourself better and working on yourself. And day after day, we always have the possibility to become a somewhat better person. I think that sometimes it's not so easy and perhaps the first step isn't always so nice. to have to admit, okay, I'm not as great as I actually thought, but being honest with myself is the very first important step on this path.
What you just spoke about, honesty with oneself, that was also in the parable. There was a tax collector who with downcast eyes beat his breast and said, God be merciful to me, a sinner. So he apparently realized what he had done wrong in his life.
This passage always deeply moved me. I think the tax collector truly felt remorse in his heart for what he had done. And I think it's important to finally feel true remorse in our heart. True remorse, which develops in the heart, normally hurts in the recognition. What have I done to my neighbor? How often have I hurt him? And what did he feel when I acted that way? And this remorse, which hurts me, is a help, so that I can develop the true, pure neighborly love in my heart. This also gives me the strength to take the first step toward my neighbor and to apologize and ask for forgiveness. When I do this, then I have a feeling of freedom, of strength in me. Through Gabriele, we know that this is the grace of God. And the grace of God is the help so that we can set new goals in our life, and also so that we no longer do what we have recognized, that we no longer make the same old mistakes.
So when I hear what you just said, what you all have told before, then I can say that here it's primarily about the deed. It is a teaching that people can hear and perhaps somehow become wiser through it. However, it has to be put into practice, and the prerequisite for this is that God can help us with this. We already talked a bit about the parable as it is given in the book, This Is My Word. But what's also interesting is that in the book are the explanations that were given by Christ regarding the parable. What does it say there?
I'll simply read it. Christ explains, corrects, and deepens his words. The self-satisfied person does not know himself, because he just looks at how he appears to others, and does not consider why he wants to give this impression. But the one who recognizes his sins and asks the Eternal Father for help, so that he may gain the strength to be able to let go of them, has already received grace and help from the Eternal. Spiritual greatness grows only out of humility. Arrogance is sin itself, for the small ego places itself above God. And so, arrogance is the basis for further temptations. The one who has inner greatness will struggle with his human ego until his life has become my life, the cosmic consciousness. The one who has reached inner greatness is no longer satisfied with dipping into the source of knowledge every now and then. He will work on himself until he reaches the origin of the source and lives in God eternally. Christ speaks here about our origin, about inner greatness. I think these are such wonderful pictures. It's simply very motivating to follow this path to God in us. And I think that the more we occupy ourselves with such thoughts and carry this vision in our hearts, the smaller and less important our small thoughts in daily life become. How much energy do we lose in daily life just trying to look good before other people? Why are we so very interested in what other people think about us? Actually, we should be interested in what God thinks about us.
I find that's a goal worth striving for. if we decide to make strength out of our weaknesses. Then this inner greatness can grow, which we heard about in the explanation, and through this we gain more self-respect and are no longer so anxious to know what our neighbor thinks of us. We no longer need to look at our neighbor to see what he thinks of us. Instead, we simply find more of a hold in ourselves.
That means that I have to examine my thoughts. I have to learn what are really my weaknesses and to recognize and to work on them in order to truly grow closer to God. Ultimately, it is to work on ourselves.
It is about working on ourselves, but it is not only work, for out of this work then grows a certain freedom. Because if I have first of all recognized myself, where are my weaknesses, where are my faults, which I could perhaps also clear up in prayer and then no longer do them, then I notice that suddenly I'm no longer revolving around myself. Instead, my view then broadens and I can also perceive my surroundings. I can perceive my neighbor, my fellow people, and nature. And these are then the finer points which I feel in life, or where I notice that this makes me really happy. And these are also the moments when I feel God in me. That is, I really feel that this strength is in me. This gives me a feeling of freedom. It's true that it's work on myself, but it's also a huge enrichment for my life.
What I've now heard from what you said is that it's work on ourselves, but we are not alone. We always have a help nearby. Or how do you see this?
Yes, it is so. We have a great help in us, and it is God who dwells in us. I notice that when I become quiet and really try to pray with my heart, then I feel like a power in me, which helps me to ask for forgiveness, or also helps me to have the courage to see my weaknesses. And that is God, and He helps me. In this moment, I have the feeling, yes, I'm protected. He comforts me, and I notice that the more I do this, the more I experience, yes, God is in me, and that makes me happier, more secure, and self-confident. I think that through this develops the inner greatness that Christ spoke about in the explanation that we read.
In his explanation, Christ also spoke of our origin and gave us as a goal that we again live in God. I think that we human beings have simply forgotten that we are children of God, that we are sons and daughters of a loving Father, and that deep in our soul, in the core of our being, we are divine. I've read a great sentence in a book by Gabriele. She said that our task here on earth is to become divine again. And then I think, why should we be satisfied with anything less?
After all that we now heard, I think all the insights that can be gained from the one single parable from Jesus of Nazareth are astonishing. This parable showed us that we can learn to understand our fellow man only when we also get to know ourselves, that is, our faults, and transform these into positive characteristics and strengths. At the beginning, we had the question, how can we shape our lives so that we feel free and satisfied? Dear viewers, dear listeners, perhaps you found several answers to this in this parable from Jesus of Nazareth. One message in the program was also that we become much more free and satisfied when we no longer need to want to present ourselves as something that we actually are not at all. In this spirit, let's stay authentic. I'll be glad when you tune in again for the next Life's Compass. Until then, all the best to you and goodbye.
of meat is a holdover from the greatest brutality. The transition to vegetarianism is the first and most natural result of enlightenment. The greatness of a nation and its progress can be judged by the way it treats the animals.
Each one of us lies in the stars, for the heavenly bodies know each of us through and through. How can we understand this? Every person has his own personal past, and yet there are so many things we can no longer remember. We simply say the past is forgotten, but is it? No energy is ever lost, so where then are the energies of our feeling, thinking, and acting? Jesus of Nazareth said, "Verily, the very hairs of your head are all numbered." Today, this is no longer inconceivable. Navigation devices bring us to any place of destination. Satellites record every corner of the earth. In relation to the recording capacity and precision of the cosmic bookkeeping, all of this is only the most imperfect and primitive technology. The Path of Forgetting, The Microcosm and the Macrocosm by Gabriella, is an engrossing read that gives insight into the cosmic correlations that are significant for every moment of our life on earth. Gabriella, the prophetess and emissary of God in our time, explains, among other things, about the pathways and sojourns of the soul in the beyond, the preparation for a renewed incarnation, or the path of evolution on the way back to our eternal homeland, to the seven-dimensional kingdom of God.
No more uncertainty about God, the free spirit, about universal values and our life. Young people speak about very diverse topics, freely and frankly, with the prophetess of the present time. The Youth and the Prophet. Order the pamphlet now, free of charge. Just right for all those looking for a deeper meaning in life.
మన షాప్ ఇన్విటేషన్ కళ్యాణ్ జ్యువెలర్స్